morning, everybody. Thank you for sharing your time with me this morning. You will have to get used to my Dutch accent. It's a very famous story being told about President Nixon and Golda Meir, who once met many years ago. And Nixon said to Golda Meir, "You know, both of us have a foreign minister who is Jewish, Henry Kissinger and Abba Eban." To which Golda said, "Yes, but mine speaks English." I'm saying this as an introduction to my English. Heavy accent. I want to thank first of all Rabbi Isaacs and my son-in-law Rabbi Michael Cohn for giving me the opportunity here to speak with you, discuss with you matters of Torah, but as Rabbi Isaacs just said, I will do that a little different than probably the way you are used to. The style will be a little different, and the content will be quite different. I'm going to take you on a tour de force, as they say, in many different directions within the Jewish tradition, and perhaps also sometimes outside the Jewish tradition, by comparing some notes to the non-Jewish world, and to try to understand what this is, this Torah of us, the 5 books of Moses. And I know that already for a long time you have been studying with several important teachers, rabbis, professors. And I want just to draw out a few ideas which I'm going to link together for you at a later stage this morning. But I need your participation, because this is not just a lecture which I can just give. And it all depends a little bit on the response which I get from you and what you have to say about all this. So in front of you, you have some very unusual texts which you probably never saw in your life. I translated these texts in English to make it a little easier for those who are not so familiar with Hebrew or with the Aramaic world, the Aramaic texts. And I just want you to take a few minutes. I will tell you, you should go already to the English text from the 2nd page onwards. There are several quotations there. And these quotations, let me just see if I may share this with you, start with, "It would appear that in the Torah, written with letters of black fire up on a background of white fire." I want you to read these texts and the texts which follow from there. They are short. They are extremely interesting. They are highly unique and unusual. They are basically Kabbalistic texts. They come from the world of Jewish mysticism. I don't know how familiar you are with Kabbalah, as it is called in Hebrew, Jewish mysticism, and I don't have to tell you that there is an enormous literature out there which is very difficult to penetrate. Number 1, the language is difficult. Number 2, the concepts are very difficult. So I have here in front of you only a few texts which relate to the nature of the Torah. The nature of what Torah really is. Now, before you start reading this text, let me quote you a statement from a secular, very famous German philosopher, which I'm sure you've all heard about, by the name of Immanuel Kant. I suppose we all know who Kant was, right? Kant was probably the greatest German Gentile philosopher we know of. Kant wrote about many different things. And one of the things he mentioned is that it is very difficult, and now I use a German expression which I will translate for you. It is very difficult to know das Ding an sich. Das Ding an sich, in English we would translate the thing itself. But there is much more to the German than there is to the English. Das Ding an sich means to say that anything we know in this world, we never know the thing itself. The reason is that the way how that knowledge comes to us is via our minds. Our mind is the way in which we are able to try to get knowledge. But there's a problem, says Kant, about the human mind, and that is that the human mind colors everything. It is not a neutral piece of flesh in your brain or in mine, but it is already being preconditioned by many ideas which or your DNA already put that into your mind even before you were born, or it is because of a psychological background going back to your great-great-grandparents, which is what Jung, the famous psychologist Jung, spoke about. There are all sorts of different facts by which at the time when knowledge comes to you, the knowledge will always appear in your mind colored, depending on your background, depending on your knowledge, depending on your family history, depending on loads of things. And therefore, says Kant, you can never know das Ding an sich. Meaning to say, there is no way how we can ever understand something completely objectively. Because by the time it already comes to our minds, before we somehow pick it up and before we start to realize it or to relate to it, the colors already have set in. And that is one of the major problems which philosophy in generally deals with. It was George Berkeley, also a very famous British philosopher, who spoke, and he was probably the first one who mentioned this point. He said, even that what you see, you can't be sure if it is really there. Because it is only through your mind that you see it. But there is no experience which we have that we can see something beyond or apart from our minds. So it may quite well be that, as Berkeley says, we are perhaps living in an enormous dream. We are all dreaming that we are sitting here, that we are studying here together, and there is no way of knowing if this is real or if this is just a dream. Because if you want to check it out, you can only do that via your brain, and your brain is part of the dream. And therefore there are big problems, says Berkeley, about knowing anything for sure. Even scientifically there's a big problem, because all what we see out there may quite well be produced by our minds. And it is not there at all. And that, obviously, if that is true, and nobody can prove this or disprove that, the world is probably a very different place. Perhaps there's no world at all. Perhaps you and I don't exist in the physical sense of the word. Berkeley was of the opinion that perhaps the only thing what you can say for sure is that you have a mind. But the mind is not exactly identical to the brain. The mind may quite well syncing up the brain, instead that the brain is syncing up the mind. So there are problems left and right. And our Jewish tradition and our Jewish philosophers were quite well aware of it. And you find some of that stuff back in the Kabbalah. Now the Kabbalah is a long story, and there are loads of differences of opinion which I won't go into now, is to the question, to what extent is the Kabbalah really Jewish? There are some people who say that it is not Jewish, and that it is pieces of mysticism coming from other dimensions and other parts of the world, which is not originally, authentically Jewish. Also say this is absolutely not true. Kabbalah is really very Jewish, and this debate is going on for, I don't know, for hundreds and hundreds of years. It was Gershom Shalom, the professor of Kabbalah in the Hebrew University, who was the first person, more or less, who brought the Kabbalah to the attention of the scientific world. If while he was right or wrong about his interpretation is a different story. I don't think that I will agree on everything what he had to say, but he was no doubt the person who put the Kabbalah on the table for many people to start to get some kind of understanding about. Anyway, the texts which you have in front of you deal with the problem of das Ding an sich. Or, to say it a little different, what actually is the Torah? The Torah which we have in the synagogues. The Torah which we read Shabbat morning. The Parashat HaShavua starting with Bereshit, which we start tomorrow again, or the day after tomorrow on Simchat Torah. We start to read that. And we claim, as the Jewish tradition no doubt does, and I shall not go into all the discussions about that this text was given by God to Moses a few thousand years ago, starting with Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. In the beginning God created heaven and earth, and as you will hear the day after tomorrow, it finishes with the death of Moshe Rabbeinu. There's only one question. Is this the real text? Is this das Ding an sich? Is this the real Torah? Or is this the Torah as it somehow reveals itself to us and to Moses a few thousand years ago, but really the very text itself is something very different? That's what these particular texts in front of you deal with. Now, I will ask you now to study these texts. I don't know if you want to do that together or each one does that on your own. I just want you to get familiar with these texts. Not because you will understand how to read them or what exactly I'm trying to get to. But I just want you to have a feeling to hear a little bit of the music coming from these particular texts. And then you have a second page where I put a few questions down, which seemingly have got nothing to do with what I just said. The truth about it is they have everything to do with what I have to say. But it will be hard for you to somehow discover that at this stage. I won't hold anybody guilty if you cannot manage to do so. I always say to my students that it is very unfair. The teacher knows exactly what he has in mind and what he has to do, and he makes everybody else do a lot of guesswork, and it's not always fair, and it is not always giving you enough time to do this properly. I'm aware of that, and I can only apologize for that. So I suggest that what you do is, first of all, read these Kabbalistic texts, but read them carefully for a moment. Again, don't worry if you don't understand. Because all what I want you to do is to get a feeling of das Ding an sich, the thing itself. After that, I just want you to read the questions which I ask. I'm not promising that I will deal with all of them, because it depends how much time we have. The topic if you have the time, I have the time till tonight. Then we can deal properly with them, but in case you want to leave a little earlier, then we will probably have somewhere to make a stop and say, that is it for today. But at least a little feeling. My main point here is, if you walk away, you will say, wow, there is much more going on over here than I'm aware of. And that in itself is a simcha. That in itself is a great joy. And that's the reason why we call this fantastic festival of ours Simchat Torah. Joy is not always what you know, but also the realization that there is so much more which you can put your mind on and never to be bored at any time. I'll give you a few minutes and then we will come back again. I want to start simple, and I will actually want to first refer you to the question which I asked at the very beginning on the page with the questions, where I'm speaking about a Sefer Torah, about the scroll of the Torah. You will see in a moment why I want to start with that. I think there is an important question which we need to ask. I'm not sure how many people actually ever asked that question, but I think it is crucial. We speak as Jews about a Sefer Torah. And we translate that in English not as the book of the Torah, but as a scroll. As you all know, A Torah is a scroll. It is not a book. Now, before we ask the question, what is the difference between a scroll and a book? And obviously, when I ask that question, I'm not just asking that it looks different, but what is the existential meaning? What is the difference existentially between a book? What does it stand for, a book? And what is a sefer, which is really not a book, but it's a scroll? But before we come to that point, one thing is clear. A scroll, like we have it in the synagogue, thank you so much, is really a phenomenon which is completely outdated. A scroll was the way how people used to write their books thousands of years ago. Yeah, when you know about the Qumran, where they found many texts of the earlier biblical days or the later biblical days in the Qumran caves, they didn't find a book there, because the concept of a book where you turn a page like we do today is a very late invention in scientific knowledge. Jews, and probably the non-Jewish world, wrote by way of scrolls. And I would straight away have to say that in itself sets in motion a very important thought. If it is a scroll, then it seems that the Torah does not at all belong in the age in which we live. It already sets itself apart. It already seems to refer to something which was created a long time ago, thousands of years ago, where people wrote their ideas in a scroll which they used to roll up. And we should really ask ourselves the question, why is it that the Jewish tradition did not change from a scroll into a book? Or if you want to have it today, why don't we change it from a scroll into a computer page? We basically kept it the old way, about 4,000 years old. And not only that we have been using and still use scrolls, and by the way, this is not only true about the Orthodox world, but also the conservative movement and the Reform, they still make use of a scroll. And if we start to think about how that scroll, better the text, is being written, that's also completely outdated. Is it not most remarkable that when it comes to the writing of the text, or, for example, making the parchment, as this is parchment made from cloth, we call it in Hebrew. Cloth is the skin of a kosher animal. That's on what we write. The way in which we prepare today the skin to make it possible for the sofer, the scribe, to write on that scroll, we write every year new Sifrei Torah, new scrolls of the Torah. We do that, the preparation of this parchment is exactly the way as it was 3,000 years ago. We haven't changed anything at all. And that's, by the way, a complicated story, how you get that parchment ready that you can write on it. But we do it exactly the same way as our great-great-great-grandparents did it thousands of years ago. We don't use any scientific knowledge somehow to update this. We go back to the caves, and that's the way how we prepare them. The ink which we use to write on the Sefer Torah, on the parchment, is exactly the same ink which they used to make 3,500, 4,000 years ago. There are many different ways of making ink today. We can have the whole thing printed in a matter of a second when we put it under the computer. We don't do anything of that at all. Even the pen which we use, I don't know if you ever saw, the scribe, when he writes word by word, letter by letter, he writes down the text, that pen is completely outdated. It is not a fountain pen. It is not the latest edition in this field, for which you have to pay a lot of money. It is an old-fashioned pen with a feather on it, and you're writing it by dipping it into that ink, and that's the way how you write it, word by word. In other words, there is no progress at all. There is no progress at all. It is exactly as it used to be a few thousand years ago. That's very strange. Jewish tradition has always been in favor of progress. It always tries to be with the latest scientific knowledge. We are living today in a world of tremendous scientific knowledge. We have had an outburst of scientific knowledge as our grandparents never saw. Nobody could even predict that, what happened in the last 50, 60, 100 years. Right? We have satellites. We know about DNA. We know about transplantations of whole body parts of a human being by which we keep people alive. We have Einstein's theory of relativity. I can go on, there's no end to it. We don't even know, and I would dare to say, scientifically we probably haven't even started yet. I remember when I went to university, I heard from teachers there that in Germany, before the war, there were whole departments at university which they closed down. The reason why they closed it down was there was nothing anymore to learn, because they had found the final solutions to their problems. And then Mr. Einstein walked in, threw the whole thing over, and we suddenly realized that we haven't started yet. But that was actually the case. People were told not to go into physics because there was nothing to discover anymore. That's not so long ago. Today we know that we haven't even started yet. And Jewish tradition, Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, doesn't make any difference, has always tried to keep up with scientific knowledge, and we use it in many other departments of Jewish tradition, of Jewish observance. I live in Israel. When we try to observe Shabbat in the army, which obviously creates enormous problems. We have a whole school, and kind of yeshiva, and at the same time a university, an academy, which discusses and tries to find solutions to what we call halachic problems in the army. Is it possible to do certain things when you normally are not allowed to do them on Shabbat? How can you do them? You all know about the Shabbat lift, which goes automatic. About the Shabbat clock, which puts out your electricity on and on Shabbat without you touching anything. Well, there is no end to it. The medical sciences, halacha, Jewish tradition is always busy and is actually making use all the time of the latest developments within science, because often they are fantastic solutions to big halachic problems which we have. But in the Sefer Torah, no progress. A complete, let's call it stagnation. As if it doesn't want to move in another century. It doesn't want to make use of it. It is completely outdated. And nobody ever saw it. Not in the Orthodox world, not in the conservative world, not in the Reform world, not in the Reconstructionist movement. Nobody ever thought about changing this. Can anybody suggest here what could be the meaning behind that? Why we're all the time busy moving forward and wanting to go with the days in which we live, when it comes to this physical thing, yes, which is to us the most holy thing, we are not prepared to make any changes at all. The ink stays the same ink, the feather stays the same feather, the parchment the same parchment, nothing. Anybody, any idea? Can anybody suggest something perhaps will explain this, or at least give an indication for it? We think the Torah is perfect. Does that mean to say that the physical condition is perfect? I agree with you that the Torah is perfect. But since in all other matters we have taken that Torah and applied it to the new conditions, why shouldn't we have done that with the Sefer Torah, with the scroll itself?
So that we always know where we came from?
Yes, there is something to that. We know where we came from, yes.
Well, as you said before, we perceive things by our prior knowledge and our prior experiences. So if we take the Torah, which is the source of all, and change it in any way, according to our current interpretation, we're ruining it for everyone who comes after us. we're changing it in some way.
We are symbolically changing it, you would like to say. Yeah, there is some truth to that. I think that's a good point.
Maybe there is some intrinsic meaning that we are not aware of in the external form, shape, process of writing the Torah. Maybe each of these things that seems to us to be just external and mechanical really have some deep meaning.
So tell me what it is. You're right. You're absolutely right. But what is it?
You said what it was. The combination of letters for the mysterical name of God, and or it is if it's the words are divided, the letters are divided, then it gives an interpretation of a literal meaning. Not the spiritual.
Yeah, you are already running into my text over here, right? Which is fine, but I don't think that it explains it, because we could do that also with a computer. We can write it in a certain way. Sorry, we can, even when it is true to say that there are many layers of reading it, and we come to that later, the fact is that you can also create these layers when you just print it on a computer, or have a computer print out, or whatever else it is, and that would be enough, right? So that doesn't, but this lady over here is getting close together with the ladies over here. Yes?
Because as the scribe is writing it, the meaning, the essence, the truth is coming through his hand, as opposed to just being printed on a computer disk.
Yeah, there is obviously something into that as well, and that is that the human being is involved in this, and not a machine. How do you call a machine in English? A machine, right? A machine. It is something which the human being himself needs to be involved in. That's also true. But that doesn't mean to say that therefore the ink has to be exactly the same ink, right? And the parchment doesn't have to be exactly the same parchment. Well, I think you're all somewhere alluding to it, but perhaps to put it in a little bit of a different way, I would say like this, that one of the problems in which we live today, and already we have been living for hundreds of years and perhaps for thousands of years, is that we are living in a tremendous flux. Things are constantly moving. Very few things in this world are stabilized. Yeah, if our age could have another name, I would say that this is an age of constant non-stabilization. Before you know something happens, it is already over and something else happens. Yeah, we are running through time as no other age has ever done. Yes, even the meaning of the word speed today has completely been changed to what it meant in the past. As I remember still, and probably some of you may remember, when Jules Verne wrote his 80 days around the Earth, or whatever it was, remember? Everybody said at the time, impossible, there's no such thing. If we now read that story, we think it is totally outdated, because we do it all in one day, and even less than that. Yeah, speed has become something completely different. And on one side, this is fantastic and it is great, because we have to be making breakthroughs in every field, especially in scientific field. But it has also done something else for us. It has created an incredible amount of instability. You don't know where you are from one moment till the next. Which is the reason why so many people are nervous, why so many people are living in constant flux. Because what is there really to hold on to? What is the sound ground on which you actually stand? Because the ground on which you stand itself became quicksand. We don't know what is happening. Yes? If it is today in the economic world here in America or Europe, or it is in Israel where you don't know what is happening from one day till the next, things move fast. They constantly change within a second, within a moment. If in Israel, like I live in Israel, every morning when you get out of your bed and you put on the radio, you're sure that something happened which nobody thought about. Because indeed, things move that fast. Pardon? Yes, everything, in the scientific knowledge of medicines, whatever it is a blink of an eye, it is every time there. Now, nobody will deny that we are living in the most unusual days, and that is fantastic what happens scientifically. Nobody will deny that. But it also created enormous moral problems. It has created enormous psychological problems. And that's what we have to deal with as well. I don't know, and I won't go into this now because there's no time for it. There are today moral problems which we never had in the past. These moral problems have been created by science. They're created because science moved so far forward that suddenly we have to make choices which we never had, especially in the medical world. Yes. Who are you going to put on a heart-lung machine? When are you allowed to take this person off from a heart-lung machine and by which the person will die? These are moral problems they didn't have 100 years ago because the machine didn't exist. Now we have enormous problems, and if you look around in this literature, there is an incredible amount of literature going on where people argue about what could be permitted and what is not permitted. We are not even sure anymore what is moral. And in fact, you should know that today what we call postmodernism, which is the name which we give for that, there is a whole philosophical trend which says there is no such thing as morality. We just have to make the best out of it. And it creates, and we Jews know more about this than anybody else, enormous problems because it means to say, what is the value of human life? Is there value to human life? Is it perhaps true that what Plato did or suggests in his Republic, that in case somebody is indeed not well, we should do away with this person because the person becomes a burden on the society and it costs us too much money? These are enormous problems. We have them right in front of us and we will get many, many more from them. I'm going to use another word here. What is happening today is the depersonalization of human beings. That is to say, we are undermining the dignity of the human being at the same time. Not that the scientists had that in mind, not at all. But somehow that is happening because we don't know anymore where to hold on to. What are the ultimate moral criteria which we can hold on to and say, these are the points of departure by which we deal with life? It's all open to debate. I'm not saying that they are not there, I'm just saying they are open to debate. So when you get a depersonalization of human beings, and old values are suddenly and constantly thrown out, to make place for something else which is 5 minutes later again thrown out. I think that what is happening here, symbolically speaking, is that somehow the Sefer Torah of ours is a protest against that. It says we need some stability. And that is what the Jewish tradition should really offer us. And it may well be, I say may well be because I can't prove that, but it may quite well be that the rabbis a long time ago said, we allow everything to progress. We will allow for the latest and of latest, we'll make use of it because it can only be a bracha. But we realize that at the same time we're undermining certain also things with that. Let's keep one thing the way it always was. The Sefer Torah. Not because we couldn't have done it differently, we can. But we shall not do so. Why not? Because at least, and there's tremendous symbolic meaning to that. When we look to that Sefer Torah, like we'll do tomorrow the day after tomorrow on Simchat Torah, and we dance around with it, it's very interesting. The only other case where you dance is with a human being. Yes? We treat the Sefer Torah as a human being, we dance with it. Right? Which means to say tremendous love. It's an expression of love. So suddenly here we dance around and the thing which I've got in my hands is totally outdated. And therefore it is so beautiful. Therefore it is such grandeur. Because it is something which I can hold on to and say, at least there is somewhere something which gives me a ground under my feet. Especially living today in the days in which we live. I think we are probably getting close, and that's what you are, I think, trying to hint to, and that is the fact, yes, in every little item of the Sefer Torah, we are being told, stabilize. In this unstabilization, in this constant flux, in this making us constantly nervous, at least the Jew has got something where he says, here I have ground under my feet. I'm not speaking specifically here about the text or what that text is, because the text in itself is open to debate, but as such it symbolizes this particular fact. That's one thing I think we need to, for a moment, to think about. Therefore, no progress when it comes to this particular issue. The second thing I think is, I mentioned that yesterday in the Young Israel here of my son-in-law's community, is that there is obviously something else. What is the difference between a book and a scroll? Can anybody give me an existential difference?
I was going to say, when you write a book, it forces you to make divisions between the words in a certain place when you go from page to page.
Yes. And that is not the case with the scroll because it continues. Okay. Good point. What else?
I think that the scroll also has this feeling of constant revelation. As you turn it and you're feeling like you are coming upon something new each time, more than in a book.
This is a clever lady. It is a clever lady. She said, and I will elaborate on that, she said that the scroll is this thing that it continues, and it is something, I think, if you would use another word, there's something infinite about it. Because a text appears, it disappears again, it appears, it disappears, because we are rolling it up. Said a little different, but no doubt that's what you had in mind. A scroll has really no beginning and no end. It is round. A circle has no beginning and has no end. And we keep that scroll when it is closed. What it really is one scroll. Right? If you, on Simchat Torah, when we start, it is really one scroll, because there's only one side of the scroll is the text, and they also sing it. There's nothing yet. It's only when we start reading, it scrolls up, it starts to roll up on the other side. Now, the moment that you have a infiniteness, something around, you don't know what the beginning and the end to it is, it therefore represents eternity. It's beyond time, it's beyond space. Right? However, the moment that you open up a Sefer Torah, you break it into two pieces. Yes? The moment you start to read the beginning, as we will do the day after tomorrow, Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'ha'aretz, God created in the beginning heaven and earth, and so on. We are breaking it up. We speak in philosophy about duality. Something becomes dual. Dual is that what belongs to our world. We live in a dual world. Why? Because, speaking in religious terms, there is God, who is absolute eternity, and there is this world, who is somehow a break away from Him, whatever that means. Right? Suddenly you get a situation where there is one thing, and there is another thing. There is God, and there is His creation. But the creation is not God. God created it. Now, as long as it is a scroll, and it's infinite, and now you have to try to hear well what I'm saying. As long as the scroll is closed, there is no text. You don't see anything. All what you see is the outside of the scroll. And you know what? That's the text. That is das Ding an sich. That's the text itself. Why do I say this? Because that what is God's language is obviously never to be able to be put into words or sounds. God is something completely different. We have no idea what God is. Perhaps Spinoza was right, perhaps other great philosophers have been right. What God is, we shall not go into this now, this is a long story, but it's completely beyond us. And God does not speak a normal human language. Because a human language is in time and in space, and God is beyond time and beyond space. Perhaps He's also in, but He's definitely also beyond. So, when God wants to write His text, and the text is das Ding an sich, it is the thing itself, then it can only be written in a way that there are no letters, that there are no sounds, because letters and sounds belong to our dualistic world. It's only within that world that we know what sounds are and that we know what letters are. They are there for us. Or if you want to say it a little different, and I know that I'm speaking difficult stuff here, somewhere when God wants to tell us something, He can't speak in His own language. Because His own language has no sounds. That's human. His own language has no letters. That's human. So how is God going to speak to man? The only way how He can do that is when He starts to borrow the language of man. Now, it's true, He created that Himself, probably. But the fact is that, to give it another name, it is an adaptation. God wants to say something to me. If He says it in His own language, which is beyond sounds, beyond letters, I don't hear anything at all. If I then say to God, God, you're trying to tell me something, but you better speak my language. Then God said, okay, I will adapt it. Like a good teacher. You know what a good teacher is? An adapter. A good teacher is when he has got great ideas and he knows that his audience is not just like that able to follow it. And what he does it, he retranslates it in the language of his audience. Yeah, that is what adaptation or what teaching is all about. I can't speak my own language. Let's put it a little different. You have a monologue and you have a dialogue. A monologue is when I speak to myself. When I speak in my own language. As long as I know what that language is all about, I can say anything to me. Can you read it? Obviously not. Why not? Because you don't know what this means. I can write tonight, when I want to remind myself tomorrow about what I need to do, I can write a few notes down, but it may quite well be that this is purely my language. If you read it, you probably will say, Robert Cardoso lost his mind. Yes, but I didn't. I know the language, but you don't. So can I speak in that language to you? Definitely not. So I have to start thinking about one thing. What I was going to say to myself in a monologue, I now need to make into a dialogue, because a dialogue means I'm speaking to somebody else, and therefore I need to take into account what language is my audience speaking. Now my friends, that's the difference between the text outside, on the scroll outside, and the text inside. The Mekubalim, the Kabbalists, have this fantastic idea, which is not to be proven or to disproven, it is an idea, it's a concept, that in the infinite world, when the scroll is still closed, and it is round and there's no beginning and no end, because in an infinite world there is no beginning and no end, there cannot be any human text. But it is das Ding an sich. It is there where you find the real thing. But I and you can't make any sense out of that, because I don't live in that world. I don't live in the world of monologue. Once I hope you get me, when I break open the infiniteness, when I split it, and I make by that an end to the infiniteness, because it is no longer just a roll, it has got now two parts to itself, and I look inside, I see a text. And I say, hey, that text speaks to me. It's a dialogue text, not a monologue text. It is a text where God wants to tell me something, not in His language, but in my language. And my language happens to be Hebrew. And I read over there that God wants to tell me, in my language, in the beginning I created heaven and earth. And then an interesting thing happens, as the lady just mentioned. Where is this inside text? It is in the scroll. And when you read it, when the Baal Koreh, as we call him in Hebrew, the person who reads from the Sefer Torah reads it, he doesn't roll open the whole Sefer Torah on all sides. He only reads the column in front of him. And when you read it, symbolically speaking, it happens. That's the hour. As in the olden days, when they really knew how to read the Sefer Torah properly, most of us don't know this anymore, to do anymore, but I had one person in my lifetime who was able to do that. When you read it, you don't read it, you live it. You are Yaakov Avinu. You are Moses. And you read it in a way that any moment things can explode. There were people who were able to do this properly. And therefore it was more acting than just reading. Like somebody who plays out a piece of Shakespeare. Yeah, it's not just reading Shakespeare, it is living Shakespeare. And that's what happens here as well. The Baal Koreh is really a man who gives a commentary on the text in the way how he raises his voice and how he brings his voice down. Because in this musical note, the way in which he reads it, and there's a specific way of reading it, the difference between Ashkenazim and Sephardi, but basically the same concept is, it is a music, which is the music of the soul, of the neshama, and I read it that way, and at that very moment I hear something of the infiniteness entering into the text. If I would read it flat, just like that, like I read a book on mathematics, and there's no music behind it, then all what I have is the text. But the great thing about music is that music lifts a word out of its contents, brings it into a higher level. Suddenly I hear something of the music behind the word, and the word gets a different meaning. There's no literal interpretation anymore. It now becomes something of a musical tone put into a word. And that's the reason why the great commentaries, right from the earliest days till today, what are they doing? You know what they are? The great commentaries are really tremendous musicians. They listen to the text. And say, what do I hear there? They don't read the text, they listen to the text. And when they listen to the text, they hear something and they say, hey, that's it. For me, that's it. For the man next door, it is that. There are different ways of reading because there are different forms of music behind the text. The text is the text. And the text in it ultimately is the adaptation of the monologue, because now I come to another very important thing, and that is that the rabbis are of the opinion, this is so interesting, that when Moses wrote down the text of the Torah at Sinai, and I shall not go into Bible criticism and all the other things, which is a long story in itself, but if we take the Jewish tradition for its own value, you know what Moses was doing there? The rabbis say something very interesting. Moses was overhearing when God was speaking to himself. And he says, I better write this down. Because who is going to have to hear this again? The trouble is that the moment he writes it down, he can only write it down in his language. In the form of letters, in the form of words, in the form of a human text. But it is like somebody once said, it is like when you look to a mirror effect. Yeah, you can see a letter one way, you can see it the other way. What we see in the text is exactly the mirror effect of the eternal text which is outside. Like outside, imagine that you have a scroll of the Torah, right? You look at from one side, you don't seem to see any letters. Then you turn around and you look to the other side, and there the letters are there. And you suddenly realize that the whole thing is transparent. But there's one side, I can't read it. Why not? Because the letters which appear there are not human letters. They are infinite. They cannot be put into ink. The Sefer Torah tries somehow to make that point to us. And now comes the point. I'm reading this column. And while I'm reading that column, I realize one thing. The moment that the text has, or better, it has happened, I go to the next column. I open something up, and something else disappears. Where does it disappear? It disappears again into eternity. And from where is the new text coming? It is coming out of eternity. And I keep on, that's what you were saying. That is exactly what I'm moving all the time. In other words, the whole text is already there. The only thing is it hasn't happened yet. Now, this is the big problem in philosophy, which again we shall not go into now, about is everything predetermined? Yes, and you can discuss that till the end of your life. We will never find the answer to that. Why? Because we are in that text. And therefore we are finite. We are stuck in that text. If you look on the other side, if we could step out, to use Immanuel Kant's understanding of saying, if you would be able to get das Ding an sich, you would just walk out, you would walk out of your own brain and look into your brain, then you would see something there, which in this world we cannot see. Perhaps you can see it when we die, I don't know. I haven't been there yet. But that's what's going on in that Sefer Torah. And therefore that Sefer Torah is obviously of tremendous symbolic meaning. Number one, it has to stay the way as it was, stability, a protest against the depersonalization and the instability in which mankind over the years has been living. And that's not only true about today, but we have always been living instabilized. And if there is any nation who ever instabilized, that were the Jews. Yes, we have never had a moment of rest. We are the wandering Jew, as we call ourselves, and that's true till this very day. And suddenly there's at least one thing we can take with us. And what is that? The Sefer Torah. We looked at the Sefer Torah and says, Baruch Hashem, I've got at least something to rely on while I'm running like crazy through this world as the wandering Jew. And at the same time I know that in that text, there is this incredible eternity there, which I know I've turned around upside down, so that I can look inside and seeing a text over there, but I realize that that text is really not the authentic text. And when I say it is not really the authentic text, I do not mean to say by that God did not give that text to Moses. I'm saying one thing. God did not give the authentic text to Moses. Where is the authentic text? Well, who has the answer? Where is it? In God. That's the reason why the Kabbalists are of the opinion that the real Torah is nothing less but God's mind. When God thinks, it is Torah. Now, my dear friends, please do not misunderstand me. I'm not going to prove you this. There's no way of proving it. It is a theory, like there are so many also theories. That's philosophy. But it's a most remarkable one in the sense that it makes us aware of what we are dealing with over here. When God thinks, what he produces, for the lack of a better word, is Torah. So if you have this Torah of ours, say the Mekubalim, the Kabbalists, right, then what you actually have is a translation and an adaptation of God's mind. Or again, saying it different, when you read the text of the Torah, like we do, we are reading God's mind. But in the translation. And what is the translation? The story of Abraham, Yitzhak and Yaakov. Which brings in a very interesting question, which I could speak for hours about. It's been discussed, and there are many views on this, is when we read a text in the Torah, does that mean that everything what is written in the Torah historically happened? We may now be able to say that that may not always be the case, neither does it need to be the case to be true. People always ask the question, is the Torah true? Yes, but now you understand that that question is a very different question. The word truth does not always mean it is true because it happened. It is true because it takes place in God's mind. It takes place in God's mind. And if anything is true, it is that what takes place in God's mind. So when I would argue, and I'm not saying by the way that anybody is arguing that, but one could argue that certain things which were taking place or which are being taught historically in the Torah did not historically take place. They just took place in God's mind. Because these stories are translations of something much higher, which if you put them on the level of where we find ourselves, you get the story of the splitting of the Red Sea. But perhaps the real splitting of the Red Sea took place purely in God's mind. Aha, you will say, wait a moment, are you not going beyond what the Jewish tradition would permit you to say? You may be right, you may not be right, but let me add also a dimension to it. It may quite well be that the whole of history, which you live and I live, what the Jews have been living, the non-Jews have been living, is only history because it takes place in God's mind. That you and I am living in God's mind. Here I go back to George Berkeley. Perhaps there's nothing out there. Perhaps here the sitting in this room is purely a dream. It is all mind imposed. That's a word which Kant used. The whole thing is mind imposed. It is your mind which makes you to think that you're sitting in this room. It is your mind which says that a whole long time ago there was a man called Napoleon. Was Napoleon there? Yes, he was there. But where? In God's mind. But since you are also living in God's mind, for you that is the reality. That's for me the reality. You know, they tell this famous story with Berkeley. George Berkeley was the Archbishop of Canterbury. But he was an enormous thinker. They used to say, how does he eat his breakfast? If he's probably was not married, when somebody in the morning brought in his breakfast, his coffee with his piece of cake, whatever it is, and she wants to put it on the table, she says, don't put it there is no table at all. And then the girl would answer, in that case there's neither any breakfast. Because that's what it is. Sorry, when he was eating his breakfast, and he said, don't put the breakfast down here because there's no table here, it's only an imagination, it's mind imposed. Then obviously her answer is, in that case, the breakfast is also mind imposed. Yeah, these are difficult things, but it's interesting to note, by the way, that what we see here is that certain philosophical concepts which have been, I would dare to say, better developed in the non-Jewish world than in the Jewish world, are really related to many things which are part of the Jewish tradition. Jews were not always the greatest philosophers. A reason I think is, and I may come to that later on if we have time, is that Jews realized one thing. You can philosophize about everything and anything. Is it going to change the world? Is it going to make a better place? We know quite well that most philosophers didn't make a better place. They had fantastic ideas. Jews were a little bit more pragmatic, and they said on the end of the day, the way how to make a better place is more depending on what you do than what you think. Which runs us right into this enormous topic of halakha. Because halakha means to do certain things, more than to think in a certain way. But perhaps I'll come to that in a moment. Yes?
My question is, if to the point that you bring us that did it happen, which is very provocative and very courageous to say, it may not be the case, and that if it's true, it doesn't mean that it happens. It's true because it takes place in God's mind. Okay, that's very beautiful. Then for me, the question is, then what is the value of that story, or what is the value of that conclusion, and how do I extract value from that? Because for me to have a discussion whether something really happened or not is out of my scope and my scientific knowledge, but to come to that point, and it's a very, very sharp point, then what is the value of that and the understanding of that, and how do I extract value from that? Because for me, that is the next step.
Good question. I think that the answer to that is that what therefore we always do more than anything else is we don't ask so much the question, did it really happen? But we do constantly ask the question, what can I learn about this in my day-to-day life? And you will see that most commentaries are always moving in that direction. They always will say on the end, okay, in what way does it make a human being a better human being? So wherever we have an option and a possibility of reading something in that story or pulling out of the story, which is a way of teaching us how to live my life in the presence of God, that is the most crucial question to ask. Which in many ways comes back to what I just said a little earlier. It is somewhere always an halachic question. Because halakha means, and now I take that word very broad, it means to say the art of living. The Jewish art of living. And the art of living is probably by far the most difficult thing of all. I can't think about anything more difficult than to know how to live. It's the only topic not taught in universities. And it's a disaster. It should have been the most important department in the universities. It used to be, by the way. But we have done away with it because we're probably scared of how to answer that question. Because the question about the art to live may not always have the answer we like to hear. So we just did away with it. Let's not speak too much about how I need to live, because it may push me in directions which is not as comfortable as I would like to live my life. And that's the reason why sometimes Jewish tradition is extremely disturbing and upsetting, because it says, this is the way how to live. I don't want to live like that. If you want to live a proper life in the presence of God, and it has to be a high moral life, you may have to go in this direction, even when you may not like it. In Yiddish they say, es schwer zu sein a Yid. It's difficult to be a Jew. It's also difficult to be a Gentile. Yes?
The point about difficulty in Jew, I said it very respectfully, but you said that Torah is true because it takes place in God's mind, and the historical event takes place in God's mind. Did the Holocaust take place in God's mind?
The answer must be, obviously, philosophically speaking, yes. What to do with that, or with any evil, I don't know. Here, evil has been obviously taken to a completely different level, which we are not able to grasp as much as we are not able to grasp, let's say, God himself, or also dimensions of what human existence is all about. I'm not going to go, in anywhere in a direction which in that way would somehow explain the Holocaust. I don't believe in explanations of the Holocaust. I don't believe it is a punishment or anything. And I know some of my colleagues are saying this. I very much disagree with that. But this would take us indeed out into a different world. I'm just saying that once you're outside time and space, everything else gets a completely different meaning. Somewhere we may have to place the Holocaust there as well, without justifying it. Who says that God is always such a nice being? We have much too much human ideas about God. I've argued not so long ago in an article that Spinoza, I suppose you all have heard about Spinoza, who definitely had a very non-Jewish way of thinking about God, may, after all, have been a more Jewish thinker than many people think, in his way how to understand God. It's a long story, or a very complicated story. But I think that what often has happened is that we have made God, and we religious people also, and perhaps first of all, we have made God too much human, so that afterwards we are not able to deal with him in the way in which the Jewish tradition would like us to deal with him. The problem is that since we are human beings, we have not much more what we can do. So therefore we speak about him in the form as if he is a being in the sense of many beings, and he is one of them. Yes. Today there are philosophers, Jewish religious philosophers, for example, who are saying that God is not an entity. It's a very profound statement. God is not an entity. It's not that you can place him here. He is a being among many beings. God is something completely different. We don't know anything about God. All what the Jewish tradition maintains is that if God wants to make somehow a kind of relationship with us, the way, according to the Jewish tradition, he does that is by revealing his mind, which is the Torah, in human language. In human language. Now, once I've said that, let's move to some of the texts you just read. One of them is obviously this, but perhaps I should mention one more fact before we get to the text. I think it's important to mention it. You know, on Simchat Torah, the day after tomorrow, when we start all over again, it's a remarkable thing that when we do so, I don't know how many times we have been having Simchat Torah in the last few thousand years. And every year we start all over again. By the way, there was once an institution of every 3 years, I think it was. But today we read the whole of the Sefer Torah in 1 year. We finish with the death of Moses, and a moment later, a second later, we start all over again. First of all, people should straight away ask, is this not getting a little boring by now? Right, I think we all agree it isn't. It's the same question when you would ask a musician or a great musician, they ask him, is it not getting boring that you again play the same piece of Beethoven? Yes, he would obviously answer, I never played Beethoven before. And when you say, wait a moment, I already know that you're playing it since you're 6, 7 years old, like Yuri Menuhin, Isaac Stern. A real musician would answer, say, you understand, I never played Beethoven before. I tell you why. Because last time that I played him, it was a completely different Beethoven. There is no such thing as a repetition in playing music. People who play Beethoven are not good players. You know who are the good players? The good musicians, when they play their own music on the notes of Beethoven. When they play their own music on the notes of Beethoven. That's what we do when we read Torah. We are not reading the same Torah again. It's never boring. It is boring when you are a bad musician. But if you're a good musician, then every time when you look into this Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz, at the beginning did God create heaven and earth, you see something, you hear something, you feel something, you sense something completely different from last year. So what are we saying on Simchat Torah? You know what we're saying on Simchat Torah? We close the Sefer Torah and we say to each other, you know what? We didn't read it well last time. Let's try again. That's what we really are doing. And then we Jews have this marvelous thing. We say, okay, when shall we start? Now. On the spot. We have a Kaddish in between, and there's a small prayer, and we start straight away all over again. You know why? We are, as I argued on Shabbat in the shul, we are perpetual beginners. The only thing what we know, Jews know well, is to start something. We never finish anything. Because we never get beyond the first word, Bereshit. Because by the time I've read Bereshit, then I'm already saying, oh, better read it next year again. I didn't get it. That's exactly the same what the musician does when he plays a piece of Mozart. He will start with a piece of Mozart and say to him, I didn't play it well, next year again. That's the way how the text stays alive. We are perpetual beginners. And just remind you of something, which is perhaps not completely fair what I'm saying, and it's not completely true either. But let's be honest, we are living today in a civilization, in a culture, where you need to finish a book. When you were in school, when I was in school, university, what was the main thing? Finish that book. So you can do your examinations, and then what? You can forget about the book. In our tradition, there's no such thing like that. Finishing anything? Jews never finished anything. And that's the reason why we're infinite, like the Sefer Torah. Because we realize there's always another way of reading it, there's a better way, there's a deeper way, there are many layers over here. There is no such thing as repetition at any time. But obviously you have to know how to play the music. And that's not easy, because we get so influenced by the world, by, perhaps I should say this is not completely fair, the secular way of reading things, that we don't understand how to deal with this Torah properly. If you speak to a great Shakespearean scholar, he will tell you, Shakespeare is never boring. Because by the time when I finish the Hamlet, I will start all over again. And somehow, we say in Hebrew, lahavdil, this is true about the Torah as well. We are perpetual beginners. Now, going back to the text that you have in front of you. What this primordial Torah, and I'm using here a very heavy word, is doing, is saying us, and that's a Kabbalistic idea, is saying to us, listen, when you read the Torah, remember, this is only one way of reading it. And when we say we are reading it only one way, I mean to say by that we pronounce the words one specific way. Bereshit, bara, Elokim, et hashamayim v'haaretz. In the beginning did God create heaven and earth. And so on. Till the last page, or the last sentence, which speaks about the death of Moses. But the Mekubalim, the Kabbalists, they say that's only one way of reading it. Why? Well, I don't know if you remember when you were bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah. I remember when I was bar mitzvah, I had one big problem. I come from a completely secular background. I come from a completely assimilated family. So when I had bar mitzvah, I really didn't know anything at all, except you had to read your parsha, as they say. What is the big problem about the parsha? If you read Hebrew, you're still not there. The trouble is that there are no vowels under the letters. And I remember that I said to the man who was going to teach me my parasha, which I had to read in the synagogue, I asked him, can I put with a pencil all the vowels under the letters? Nobody will find out. And I can read it without making any mistake, because to remember with this bereshit or barashit or whatever, there's so many possibilities, because Hebrew has no vowels. So he said to me at the time, asur, is forbidden. If you do that, which is true, then you by that make the Sefer Torah pasul, we say in Hebrew, which means invalid. You can't use it anymore. And I asked him why. What is there? I mean, the only thing what I will now achieve is that I read it correctly. So what can there be pasul about it? He didn't know the answer. I'll give you the answer. The answer is this. The answer is that the way of reading Bereshit, bara, Elokim, et hashamayim et haaretz is one of the many ways in which you can read these letters. Why? And this is what you just saw in one of the texts. Because there obviously another way of reading the text. For example, by putting other vowels under it. And if there are other vowels under it, it may quite well mean that the word has now a different meaning than what it means when we read Bereshit. Right? And on top of that, it could quite well be that the ways in which the letters, and this is again a Kabbalistic concept, are put next to each other, yes, Beit, Resh, Aleph, Shin, Yud, Tet, and so on, right? What would be if we break up these letters somewhere else, not after the word Bereshit, stop, Bara, stop, Elokim, stop, and so on. But we, for example, will take two letters off from the word Bereshit and move them to the next word. Then you could be reading in Hebrew, Berosh Yitbara. Same letters. Same order, but Berosh Yitbara is not exactly the same as Bereshit. Now, according to the Mekubalim, this is a fantastic theory, and a piece of unbelievable creativity. The rabbis were of the opinion that when Moses came to the Mount Sinai, and he said to God, okay, I came here to pick up the Torah. Right? So God said to him, okay, here it is. And what does he show him? He shows him only white fire. Eish levana, it says in Hebrew. That's in your text. White fire. No text, no history, no commandment, nothing at all. Says Moses to God, I asked you to give me the Torah. You're giving me here an infinite amount of fire? And God says, yes, that's the Torah. That is das Ding an sich. That's the thing itself. Can you read it? No way. Says God, I know you don't. But I just want you to have a reflection of das Ding an sich. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to throw black fire on top of that white fire. And then you will see a remarkable thing happening. And that is that the black fire which I throw on top will create letters. And the first letters which appear are the 4-letter name of God. The Yud K Vav K, which we Jews don't pronounce. Adonai, we say normally. It appears. The Yud K Vav K. Yud He Vav He. God says to Moses, Moses, can you read that? He says, yes, but what is that? And God says, these 4 letters are my DNA. They are my DNA. Says Moses, but what am I going to do with this? If I bring this to the Jewish people, are they going to learn anything from this? Says, no, you have to understand, I need to adapt it even more. I have to bring this mind of mine down to the level and adapt it to the point that man starts to see meaning in it. And then something, say the Kubalim say, the Kabbalists say, in a certain moment, an enormous amount of letters appear, all one word, nowhere any breakup whatsoever, all one word, and in that one word, the whole of the Torah text appears, but there is only one word. Says Moses again to God, what is this? Says God, this is my second name. And I suppose Moses said, well, you don't want me to pronounce this, right? And God says, no, it's still beyond you. What I'm now going to do is I'm going to take this enormous name of mine and I will break it up in short words. And God keeps on asking Moses, in according to this story, can you read it now? And Moses says, well, here I can read the word, there I can read the word, but some words there which are beyond me. And God says, okay, I'll break it up again. And he keeps on breaking it up till at a certain moment Moses says, got it. Read it. Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'haaretz. In the beginning did God create heaven and earth. Read further. And Moses reads further. Suddenly there is a human text. And then God says, I want you to know this is an adapted text. This is the only text which I can give you, because beyond that you can't. But the Mekubalim, the Kabbalists, were incredibly daring when they said the following. And Maimonides and many other people strongly objected against this, but it is there in the Jewish tradition. Remember, there's another thing which many people don't understand, and that is there is no such thing as a final way of thinking within the Jewish tradition. There are many different ways, there are many different possibilities out there. We are having no dogmas within the Jewish tradition. I would love to speak about it in great lengths, because many people, including many Orthodox people, think that there are dogmas. There are no dogmas. There are beliefs, but that's something else. Anyway, one of the things is, just one moment, one of the things is that the Kabbalists say like this. How long can the text in which we read it today, how long can that respond to the circumstances of mankind? If the Torah responds to the conditions of man, then the Torah makes sense. But what happens in the case where the Torah is responding to something and mankind no longer lives in that situation? And what is the most famous case? The Messianic age. Because in the Messianic age, in according to the Jewish tradition, we will live morally on a completely different level. And when you say to a man living in the Messianic age, don't kill, he will say, what are you speaking about? I don't know what that means to kill. I don't know what it means you are not allowed to steal. Stealing is no longer part of my language. What are you going to do then? Then it seems to me that the text of the Torah is outdated. That it no longer responds to the new conditions of mankind. And the Kubalim, the Kabbalists, were very concerned about that. And you know what the answer is? They said, aha, that's the reason why there are no vowels under the letters. Why not? Because when the Messiah comes, the Messiah will come, and we move up to a much higher moral level, and you open up the Sefer Torah, you can't read it anymore, Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'haaretz, because it's Chinese. What it is now is that suddenly you see in the same letters a different text. which may be pronounced differently than Bereshit bara, and therefore there are no vowels under the text. You know why? Because the text must always be ready to be read when the Mashiach comes. Imagine that in a matter, and according to Jewish tradition, the Mashiach can come any moment. We can't rewrite all the Sefer Torah. So the Sefer Torah is already ready for the Mashiach as well. You just have to read it a little different. Break up the letters a little different. By the way, and according to the tradition, the first Sefer Torah which Moses wrote was indeed without any spaces between the letters. To allow that we can read it differently. We have it today with spaces in between only to make it a little easier on the man who has to read it. But it's not even a halachic requirement. You could read it all in once and break it up differently. Before I continue, yes, there's a question there. Oh, I'm sorry about this. I'm sorry. I'm not used to speaking microphones. Very quickly, but really quick.
Okay. Can you say what you said that what was written in the past didn't happen at all? And what you said before about it may not be the case, and it doesn't mean true doesn't mean that it happened. In the same thing, can you say about what you just said? That if it's written in the Torah that something will happen, does it mean that it really will happen, or is that also in Hashem's time?
Yes, it will. It all has happened and it all will happen. But it doesn't mean that it happened. That's right. Real happened is a word which is not fitting into this discussion. Because what is the word real?
Really quick, so
yeah, okay, no, you're right. Let me answer you a little different. Rabbi Wein, Beryl Wein, once said to me, or he said once to an audience, and I'll never forget that, when he said, I will tell you a story which has not yet happened. Right? And here somewhere is something similar to that. The question about happening or not happening is a metaphysical question, as far as the Torah is concerned. So we are not bothered now about the question if it historically happened or what does it mean history, because history may be metaphysics, and that nothing happens because it is all in our mind and it is not beyond our mind. All these possibilities are open. I'm not answering them because we don't know how to answer them. I'm only wanting to make a picture. I want you to walk away with saying when we speak about Torah, we speak about something very different from the normal way how we speak about, let's call it the Bible, in a non-Jewish world.
About something that will happen, could that also be just in Hashem's?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, but remember one thing, since God is not present or past and future, but is beyond that, so the question about will it happen in the future becomes nearly meaningless.
Your verbiage, that's all.
That's it. Now, I want you to go and look in a text here which you have in front of you. I'll introduce that text. That text is number 5. There was a very great man, a Sephardi thinker and philosopher, and a Kabbalist. I'm sure some of you have heard about him, by the name of Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, who lived in Spain and who was very involved in Kabbalistic teachings and dealt exactly with the question I just asked. What is happening with the text in the Messianic age? Which, he says, you can also translate as different. What happened with the text of the Torah before it was given to Moses? Because there is a tradition which says that the Torah was indeed given to Moses in his days. But how can it be that the Torah was not given earlier? Shouldn't it have been given the moment that man came into existence? Don't we need always the Torah? Why wait so late? So the Kabbalists, they answer, it was always there. But the readings which they had of this Torah before Moses was different than the readings they had after Moses. The letters created different words. So who had the Torah first? Adam and Eve. That they actually observed the Torah. Says Rabbi Moshe Cordovero. Problem. Why? Because there are laws in the Torah which could not have applied to Adam and Eve. And one of them is, you may not know, we have a law, one of the 613 commandments in the Torah, that Jews are not allowed to wear linen and wool in their garments. Which is a law which still applies till this very day. We call it in Hebrew shatnes. A mixture of linen and wool. And there is in Deuteronomium and Devarim a straight statement, don't wear linen and wool in your garments. So how is this applying to Adam and Eve? They did not have any garments. They walked around naked in that place. So what are they going to do with this text? Comes Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, and he says, well, have a look in the text. We read it today, and this is in the text in front of you, Sha'atneis tzemer ufishtim, the mixture of wool and linen. 3 words, Sha'atneis, tzemer, and stim. Can't be the case in the days of Adam and Eve. Can neither be the case in the days of the Messianic age, because according to the Kabbalists, in the Messianic age, man will walk around again naked. Because our garments are our bodies. The real us, das Ding an sich, is our soul. So everybody will walk around naked again. So what are we going to do with the text? Says Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, I tell you. The text then will be broken up differently. Instead that it reads Sha'atnes Tzemer Ufishtim, it will say Satan as Metzar Utofsim. The same letters, broken up differently, will now create a different text. And what is that text? That text says Satan, which is the English word Satan, means a warning that you should not mix up things, because if you do, then there will be az, with an ayin, from Shatnis. Az means to say a power will come free, an unpleasant power, and it will create meitzar, which means pain, utosim, and will throw you into trouble. So how does that work? Says Rabbi Moshe Cordovero like this. It means the following. When Adam was told not to eat from the tree of knowledge, he was told, if you eat from the tree of knowledge, whatever that meaning of that whole episode is over there, which is a big problem in itself, or a big issue in itself, the answer is that when God said to him, I don't want you to eat from the tree of knowledge, because if you do eat from the tree of knowledge, you are mixing up things. What are you mixing up? The higher world and the lower world. The higher world and the lower world should not be mixed up because they don't belong together. So keep away from that tree or from that particular fruit at the time. Not mixing up. If you do, you mix things up. You will then, mixing up will create it will create a powerhouse of meitzar, of pain, and of sin, and it will make you in an incredible amount of trouble. So when Adam read this line in the Torah, right, it didn't say don't put linen and wool in your garments. It said don't eat from the tree. Because what it will do is, it will mix up the whole thing. The higher world and the lower world. Of which our mitzvah today of linen and wool, say the rabbis, is a symbolic reflection of that ultimate prohibition which was given to Adam and Eve. So is the commandment changed now? The answer is yes and no. Yes, in the pragmatic way, how you apply it, linen or wool, or on a higher level, but on a symbolic way, it is still the same commandment. Don't mix up things which don't belong together. Tzemer, which means wool, belongs to the animal world. Fishtim, which means linen, belongs to the agriculture world. Somewhere, I shall not go into all the meaning behind that, is don't mix these two up.
There are kvulot, we say in Hebrew. There are certain boundaries which should not be overgone or should not be violated, because we may do more trouble and more damage than we do any good. So, say the Kabbalists, we saved the commandment, in the sense that it now can be read on this level, it can be read on this level. The idea behind it is still the same. The application is different, comparing or completely depending on where, in which age you are living. Before Moses, after Moses, in the days of Adam and Eve, in the days of the Mashiach. And Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, unbelievable, says, I can read the whole of the Torah like this. I can break it up differently, put different vowels under it, and you get a messianic reading. And that is what will be applied in the days of the Mashiach. That is the text which you have in front of you by 5, where it says, "Du shalt not wear shatnez." If you have afterwards an opportunity to read it through, read it once more through. It's all to do with the theory that the Torah is an infinite matter, which only got translated on our level for our days, as long as it makes sense, to be changed again, and not being changed at the same time, the moment that we are coming to live in a different situation. I understand we nearly have to finish, right? So I will make one speculative observation here, which is purely on my side and may be complete nonsense, but I still want to share it with you. Is there a Torah anywhere else in the universe, except here in this particular place, our planet? We don't know. But there is something very interesting about the Jewish tradition. There are midrashim, very interesting, which claim that there is life out there. There are different pieces in the Talmud which seems to indicate that there may quite well be life in other planets. Yes, we are still looking around scientifically. If we hear anything coming. Somebody once wrote, the best proof that there is life out there is that it never made any connection with us. But whatever. It could quite well be, and again I have no proof for this, is that the Kabbalistic way, and by the way I'm not at all a Kabbalist, this is not at all my field, but it's interesting to be aware of these things. That the Kabbalist probably would say, if God translated his mind in human terms, and made it into Hebrew like we read it today, why should he not have translated it also in a kind of language which belongs to the people living on Mars or Jupiter or anywhere else, which we perhaps don't know what that language is? Because if it is all a translation and adaptation, because ultimately it is the mind of God, right? Then if another kind of life needs a different kind of manifestation of this Torah to guide them in what their lives are all about, why should it not be there? And then the interesting thing would be that if one day, which could obviously happen, when outer space people will land in our world, and by the way, if it ever happens, it will happen, no doubt, in Yerushalayim, but that's my personal opinion. Then what will happen is that if we start to compare this Jupiterian Torah with our Torah, and then you ask the question, is there any similarity? Then the answer on the end of the day must be, yes, it's exactly the same thing. Only one is translated in human terms, the other one is translated in the terms of Jupiterians. A third one of people living on Mars, whatever it is. Because now the Torah is no longer a text like we read it. It is a concept which is primordial. And that primordial is that eternity of this very Torah. And I think somewhere, on some level, when we dance with the Torah in a few days' time, on Simchat Torah, we should be aware of it. It is a personality. You dance with a personality. We are married to this particular incredible thing. And at the same time, it reflects that it was never prepared to move. It stayed the way as it is, as if it's somewhere, something which says to us, hold on to this. Whatever your life is, whatever changes in this very world, the fact is there are some ultimate values to hold on to. If you dance comes around with this. You have some stability under your feet, and that's the great joy which we all should have. I thank you very much.
I just want to thank Rabbi Cardozo very much. After hearing him, I'm not sure whether we heard anything today or not. But that's something you'll have to think about as you go into Simchat Torah and Shmini Atzeret. You have a few minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. So if anybody has any questions, Rabbi Cardozo will be around and we'll take a few questions. Okay. Somebody asked me when he's speaking again. He's going to be speaking Motzei Shabbat at Young Israel Oak Park, which is on 10 Mile between Greenfield and Coolidge, at 8:30 p.m. So that Rabbi Cardozo will be speaking again Saturday night at 8:30 at Young Israel Oak Park, and you're all welcome to come. And again, Rabbi Cardozo will be here to take any questions, and we thank you very much. And Shana Tova, as we say, and have a very